This wasn't just another political moment. This was a full admission from Keir Starmer himself. But instead of ending the story, it may have made things much worse. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe, because this situation is developing fast, and it's far from over. Over the last few days, pressure has been building around Starmer's decision to appoint Peter Mandelson. But what happened in the Commons today completely changed the tone of the story.
I should not have appointed Peter Mandelson. I take responsibility for that decision, and I apologise again to the victims of the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, who were clearly failed by my decision.
That right there was a direct admission. He says it clearly, he shouldn't have made the appointment. Now, this isn't just about one decision. This is about what was known at the time, and what wasn't. Because as more details have come out, serious questions have been raised about what information was available, who knew what, and how this decision was allowed to go ahead. And that's where things start to get complicated. Because once that admission was made, the pressure didn't go away, it intensified.
The Prime Minister appointed a national security risk to our most sensitive diplomatic post.
This is the moment where the narrative shifts. This is no longer just about a mistake. It's about the consequences of that mistake. At this point, there are only a few possibilities. Either key information wasn't properly considered, or it was known, and the decision was made anyway. And neither of those options looks good. Because when you are talking about a role this sensitive, this high profile, and this politically explosive, the standard is supposed to be much higher. This is not a minor appointment. This is not some low-level administrative error. This is the kind of role that goes right to the heart of government, credibility, and national judgment. And that is why the questions are now becoming so serious. Because if the information was available, if concerns existed, if warnings were there in any form at all, then people are naturally going to ask one simple question. How did this still happen? How did a decision this important move forward without somebody somewhere stopping the process and saying, hold on a second, this needs to be looked at again? That is what makes this story so politically damaging. Because the public can sometimes forgive a bad decision if it looks like an honest mistake. But what they struggle to forgive is the feeling that a decision was made recklessly, or worse, that obvious warning signs were brushed aside. And that is where this becomes a problem not just of judgment, but of leadership. Because leadership is not simply about making appointments. It is about asking the right questions before those appointments are made. It is about seeing the risks early. It is about understanding how a controversial decision will look, not just internally inside Westminster, but to the wider public watching from the outside. And right now, that is exactly where Starmer is exposed. Because even if you take his defense at face value, even if you accept the idea that key information was not given to him, that still does not fully remove the political damage. Why? Because it still leaves him facing a very difficult question. If you were not told, why were you not told? Why did nobody think this was important enough to put directly in front of the Prime Minister? Why did nobody stop the process? Why did nobody say this could blow up later? And once those questions begin, the issue stops being one appointment and becomes something much broader. It becomes about control. It becomes about whether the people at the very top really know what is happening around them. And in politics, that can be just as damaging as making the wrong decision in the first place. Because if the Prime Minister knew, the criticism is obvious. But if the Prime Minister did not know, that creates a different problem entirely. It suggests weakness. It suggests distance. It suggests a leader who may not be fully in command of the machinery around him. And neither interpretation is a comfortable one. That is why this story keeps growing. Because it leaves people with a choice between two explanations. And both of them are politically painful. Either this was a failure of judgment, or it was a failure of oversight. Either way, it reflects badly on the leadership. And that is before you even get to the wider political optics of all this. Because politics is not only about what happened. It is about how what happened looks. And this looks bad. It looks messy. It looks avoidable. It looks like something that should have been caught long before it reached this stage. And once a story starts to look like that, the damage is no longer contained to one news cycle. It becomes symbolic. It becomes the kind of story that opponents can return to again and again and again, to reinforce a broader narrative. A narrative of poor judgment. A narrative of weak control. A narrative of a government that is reacting instead of leading. And that is exactly why this moment matters so much. Because this is bigger now than the appointment itself. This is about whether Starmer can convince people that he is still fully in charge of events, fully aware of what his government is doing, and fully capable of preventing this kind of crisis before it explodes in public. At the moment, that is the real challenge. Not just defending the original decision, but defending the competence of the leadership behind it. And once you reach that point, the political danger rises very quickly, because leaders can survive controversy. They can survive criticism. They can even survive major mistakes. But what becomes much harder to survive is the impression that things are slipping beyond their control. And that is exactly the impression this kind of moment can create.
The Prime Minister says he only found out on Tuesday that Peter Mandelson failed the security vetting. The earliest opportunity to correct the record was Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, almost a week ago. This is a breach of the ministerial code.
At this stage, this isn't just criticism. It's direct confrontation. But here's where things really escalate. Because instead of closing the story, that apology opened the door to even more questions. We're now seeing repeated attempts to explain what happened.
Mr. Speaker, I understood it to be subject to developed vetting, but it was because...
But those explanations aren't fully convincing. And when that happens, the story grows. And then, this happened.
Order, sit and leave. Leave now. I'll name you otherwise and go now if I were you.
This kind of moment only adds fuel to the fire. Because in politics, mistakes happen. But what really matters is how those mistakes are handled. Do you take control of the situation, or does the situation take control of you? Right now, this is starting to look less like a one-off error, and more like something that's escalating. Because once public trust starts to shift, it's very difficult to reverse. And that's the real issue here. Not just the decision itself, but what it now says about leadership. What do you think? Is this just political pressure, or is this something much bigger? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more updates.